One important topic in public history and museum studies that I have never yet touched on this channel is how the visitor shapes the museum. I've talked about the opposite, about how museums plan to educate and how they plan to deliver their mission statements and their visions, but I have never talked about flipping the script. Who are our visitors? Who do we want them to be? How can we best serve them? How do they engage with what we offer? And how can we change to best accommodate what they want from us? John Falk and Lynn Durking were revolutionary when it came to writing about the relationship between the institution and the visitor. But instead of writing about what we could educate them on, they wrote about what visitors wanted, expected, and needed from their trip. Books like The Museum Experience break down the different phases of the trip, differentiate between different kinds of visitors, and look at each aspect of the museum visit as it relates to the holistic experience. And for years now, people have been asking a really big question. How do we get millennials into the museum? And this is actually a really big problem. The millennial generation is so large, the largest generation, that it is both possible and true that they are at once the largest subsection being served by museums, and yet the only generation that is underrepresented in the public who goes to museums. In order to bring that number up to the level of visitation we see in other generations, museums have tried lots of different tactics. Recommendations range from networking opportunities to a chance to unplug, but lots of museums do these things, and yet the gap persists. Now, there are plenty of reasons for this, including the fact that tastes and interests change over time. But one thing that I don't see talked about very much is the fact that millennials really don't have that much spare time or spare money. In the museum world, we talk about how the 1950s ushered in a boom in visitation to historic sites. Car culture, liquid assets, and spare time all led to this new interest, but now we're starting to see the opposite. Millennials make 20% less in real terms than baby boomers did at the same age, and own just 3.2% of the overall wealth in this country, whereas boomers at the same age own 21%, 7 times as much. Between mile-high student loan debt and knowing that driving Uber for a few hours would make a little extra money, it's honestly hard to get yourself to the museum, even if you want to. But nobody's talking about this. Nobody sees the failure to bring millennials into the museum as anything but a short-term failure to grab their attention. If you've never heard of the Millennial Wealth Gap, or if you're not too familiar with it, let me explain how generational poverty works. So you've got baby boomers who hit a median age of 35 in 1990 and collectively held 21% of the nation's wealth. There was still lots of variation between rich and poor, but collectively they had about a fifth of the pie. And then you've got millennials. We currently have a median age of 33 and hold just 3.2% of the nation's wealth, 1/30th of the pie, or 1/7th of what the boomers had at our age. And we're a big generation, the biggest. And we're not children anymore. There are middle-aged millennials. The youngest millennials are just 1 year younger than me. Yet despite this, millennials have no material wealth, and there's no sign that this is going to change. If this video is about the fact that millennials have been screwed over, not individually, but systemically, if I had cold hard cash for every time someone made that fallacious argument, I could pay off my student loan debt. Individual success or failure does not disprove a larger trend, and larger sociological trends cannot be chalked up to the same kind of characteristic that one might attribute to an individual. And if I was trying to make a case for our generation, I might say that it's not just a matter of us needing to grow up and get a full-time job, because 91% of us want a full-time job. I might also say that it's not a matter of us going back to school to be retrained. We have more degrees and more student loan debt than any prior generation. But this video isn't about the plight of millennials. This video is about the fact that museums rely on people being able to purchase tickets for entry, buy things in the gift shop, and rely on hefty donations from private individuals. We like to blame millennials for killing industries instead of facing up to the fact that we're just too poor for things like homeownership and parenthood. Funnily enough, the wine industry is booming. But blaming millennials didn't save Toys R Us, and it won't save museums either. As I see it, we have two options. Either we can fix our very bad wealth problem by raising minimum wage and taxing the wealthy appropriately, and I'll believe that when I see it. Or we're going to have to make sure that the museums we want to be around in 20 to 30 years are self-sufficient before the wealthy donor base dies off. Now you might be thinking, once the wealthy people die off, that money is going to be inherited by their children, and then they will have the money to donate. And there's some truth to that. There are always going to be wealthy people who are able to donate to museums, or any other worthy cause. But with an inheritance model, rather than a taxation and redistribution model, we end up with more wealth concentrated in the hands of even fewer. And the problem here is that it's been statistically proven again and again that people with more wealth and more income donate a smaller percentage of that wealth and that income as compared to people who make a more modest salary and have more modest means. Because of this new wealth distribution, this spells bad news for museums too. You might also say that millennials really enjoy art, and they might be the best patrons yet, and guys, we have nothing. We're working with an impoverished generation that can barely make ends meet. There will always be exceptions, of course. There will be wealthy millennials who make it, but on the macro scale, the scale that matters for this conversation, for institutions that rely on generous donations, we're looking at lean times. If we still want to be here in 20 to 30 years, small museums are going to have to learn to be a lot more self-sufficient.